Hello, welcome to Expanded Knowledge. This is Anthony. In this video, I'm going to be responding to NewsNation's recent coverage on the last JFK assassination hearing, playing a couple of short clips and just giving a little bit of commentary on my reaction to it. In my last video, I covered the last hearing that happened about a week ago about the assassination of the U.S. President John F. Kennedy in 1963, still an ongoing investigation, and all information and signs pointing towards a cover-up about how he was really assassinated. You can check that video out. The point that I wanted to make in this video is that I did make a mention in the last video about a journalist named Geraldo Rivera, and I kind of was offering my criticism of how NewsNation and has covered this in their clips, and how they've brought on Geraldo Rivera, who basically is just flat out saying there's nothing more to it. Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone shooter, case closed. And sure enough, as I'm looking on YouTube today, I see there he is again saying the same thing. So I wanted to just play those clips back and kind of offer what questions should this journalist be asking this other journalist, and what they should really be talking about if they're really after objective truth. So let's get into looking at some of the clips here. I'll play sort of the beginning, and then we'll take it from there. And again, this is on NewsNation, who kind of markets themselves as this independent, investigative media outlet. Remember, it's NewsNation who was the first to interview David Grush, the UFO whistleblower, and has also was the first to interview Jake Barber, the other UFO whistleblower from earlier this year. So they've positioned themselves in that sense. But it's interesting, and I always wonder who's really running NewsNation, because it's interesting their spin on things. And sometimes they ridicule topics like this, and they're throwing a lot of kind of uncritical doubt on certain things, even though they're the ones who interviewed David Grush and so forth. So I think it's interesting how they do that, and this is another example of that. So let's check it out here.
Based on what you witnessed, do you believe the CIA engaged in a concerted effort to cover up certain facts related to the assassination of President Kennedy?
Yes.
Are the wounds you observed consistent with the government's conclusion Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone?
Have you ever seen the magic glasses that can see clearly without glasses? This glasses can not only see.
No.
The testimony included allegations of tainted medical files, fake x-rays, lost bullet fragments, even parts of the president's brain gone missing. This hearing, the second on the JFK assassination from the House Task Force on the Declassification.
Now, notice there what I focused on in my last video as being the most significant part of the whole hearing, the witness, Douglas Horne, who was the chief analyst of military records on the Assassination Records Review Board in the early 90s, saying what they have highlighted there, that the x-rays were fake, that files were switched out, images, parts of the brain and the bullets were mishandled and taken out. They mention that here, but they're never going to talk about it again, and Rivera's not going to talk about it either.
Of federal secrets. And one witness, the first Black member of the Secret Service, who was assigned to protect President Kennedy, testifying for the first time at the age of 90 years old. For years, Abraham Bolden says presidential security was lax and has called for declassifying government documents related to JFK's assassination.
And they choose to focus on the testimony from the gentleman Bolden there, which if you watched, it was extremely hard to hear. He was calling in remotely on Zoom, and the audio was really bad. He was also very elderly, and it was hard to hear what he was even saying. And even though his testimony is important, because he said he was basically put into a psych ward for speaking out again about what happened that day of the assassination, of course, again, it's interesting how the media, NewsNation here, is going to focus on his testimony and him as a witness, and you'll see that's the rest of what they really focus on here. And they're going to lead with the sort of identity politics about him being the first Black Secret Service agent, which is great. But again, that's sort of just taking the focus away from what we're talking about here. It's not really important to, did the government and is the government still covering up how JFK was shot that day? And if they are, that's a serious red flag about why. It distracts from that. But anyway, let's continue with the clip here and we'll get Geraldo Rivera's first words.
There's so much to talk about, and joining us tonight is NewsNation correspondent at large, Geraldo Rivera. And of course,
hi, Natasha.
Hello. He has spent decades investigating this Zapruder film and evidence connected with this. Geraldo, we're so lucky to have your insight into this tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
You're so kind. Thank you.
Let's start with Abraham Bolden here. I mean, this was an incredible testimony. The former Secret Service member said there was a plot to kill Kennedy at the Army Air Force football game in Chicago 3 weeks before the assassination. What do you make of that stunning claim?
Well, I'd like to see the evidence writ large. I just believe that so long after the events, and they have them sealed and unsealed and have various investigative bodies and legislative bodies pour over them. I've lived through so many phases of this coming back. Now it's the football game. Now whatever else it is. There's always a tidbit. There's always something. There's always a witness, 90-year-old, and then they were 80, and then there was 70, and there was 60. And still, after all this time, I still come back to the same conclusion. If it had been something other than the Warren Commission finding, that Lee Harvey Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald alone killed John Kennedy, we would know it by now.
So that is his main argument. And look, I could understand how if he covered this as an investigative journalist for decades and never really got anywhere, how it could get frustrating and you could just say, I'm done with this. I think it's just what it is. Oswald killed him. But his argument is that if it was anything other than just Oswald with the lone bullet, we would know about it by now. That's such a flawed argument. I don't even want to waste too much time tearing it apart, with all due respect. It's not true. Clearly, it took a executive order and a congressional mandate in the early 90s, 30 years ago, and 30 years after the assassination to then start to release files. And from all the testimony of everyone who was up there at this hearing, which they don't discuss at all here, who were all on the board, and the chairman of the board literally telling Congress under oath, we were blocked, it was obstructed, agencies didn't cooperate with us. So my response to Rivera would be, but if there wasn't anything more to it, why is there all this obstruction of evidence? Why is there all this obfuscation and withholding of information? If it was just Oswald with the one shot, why would they do all this? Let it out there. Doesn't make any sense. So it's a very weak argument. It seems that he just kind of has his mind made up for some reason that there's nothing more to it. And again, they're focusing on something that's easily dismissible. As much as I believe the gentleman Bolden that he heard at an Army football game there was a plot to kill Kennedy, I mean, that's a great other little piece, but it's not really good evidence because it's just hearsay. It's not going to really move the needle. As I said in my last video, the testimony and the information provided by Horn and then the other two congressional staffers, well, chair of the review board, and then the gentleman that worked on the assassinations committee in the 70s, clearly telling you under oath that the CIA and other agencies were blocking them from getting information. You don't do that if it's just the simple conclusion that the Warren Commission came up with. Plus, there's just all the other stuff, the medical records information from Douglas Horn that we've been speaking about. But let's go back and hear what the rest of what Rivera has to say.
So I am unconvinced by all this recent testimony. And it always seems to me that the Congress people involved are always the most eager to get on TV and and they make news by outrageous or outlandish or unprovable claims.
And there you see the bias, and almost feels almost somewhat scripted. I could be reading into it. It seems like he's reading from something. It does seem like he's sort of looking at a teleprompter. I don't know. But again, nobody's trying to be famous from this, from Congress. I don't think so. Again, the people on the panel, go read it again. These were all people who worked at the highest level for congressionally mandated investigations into this incident. One of them, a longtime military veteran, federal employee, author of multiple books, well-researched books, chair and chief analyst of military records. So these are not just people putting out outlandish theories, as he says there. It's not outlandish at all. It's very simple. It's just the gentleman who was tasked with fully investigating this for the government literally said all this evidence was obstructed, withheld, changed, faked, and you just don't do that if there's nothing to cover up. So I just think he's way off base with this.
I think that, if there were some other reality, by now we would know about it.
And again, yeah, that's his big argument, is that we would know about it if there was anything more to it, which just doesn't hold up. It's just a fallacy to think that. And let me reshare here. Couple more clips that I'll show here. This next one, he begins to talk about his experience with the Zapruder film.
I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was a low-down, dirty communist. He went to live in Moscow. He came back. The one thing ex-Marine, the only thing in his life he ever did well was the assassination. He was a marksman. He was a sharpshooter.
So yeah, that's him again saying that he believes it was Oswald alone. Let's check out this part here.
I know, because of the historic connection between me and the Zapruder film and the fact that I was the first to run it, that I will forever be asked about the assassination. And I accept the task, but I have to tell you that if my opinion has any more weight than anybody else's who's not a forensic pathologist, it just seems to me that I am convinced that this was the tragedy of the.
Yeah, so what I just wanted to highlight there is he is saying that his opinion has more weight than anyone else's other than a forensic pathologist. And I just really would challenge that. Again, going back to the witnesses that testified in this hearing last week, which is what they should be talking about, and the journalist and NewsNation should be asking him better questions and better follow-up questions. Because again, as I highlighted in my last video, it seems very simple. You have multiple wounds and gunshots coming from the front, which doesn't correlate, does not fit with the story of the official Warren Commission's conclusion that he was shot with a lone bullet from the window on the side by Oswald. And then you have the person who was tasked with looking into all of these records, going back, digging them up, interviewing people, looking at and taking depositions from people who were there when the medical examination was done, and him having multiple people, some testifying under oath, others testifying to him on the record, that the x-rays, the photos, the videos were tampered with, and that there were other gunshot wounds that would prove beyond any doubt that there were other shooters. And it's that simple. That's how I see it. So for him to say that because he's the first journalist one of the first journalists that got the Zapruder film, that his opinion holds more weight than anyone besides a forensic pathologist, I would say no. Douglas Horne, and others on that review board investigation committee hold more weight, I would say, than him. Because even though he's a journalist, he was not, on a staff where every day they were investigating this, going through declassified documents and trying to get to the bottom of it as their full-time job for years under congressionally mandated review board. So I'm going to play one more clip here, and then we'll close out here. And this is kind of some of his final statements. So I'm going to cut it there to just summarize for you what he said in his last part there. Comment on the last couple things there. He, again, is saying that about the Zapruder film, right? But what I would have asked him, if there was better journalists out there, I would have said, "Oh, did you hear Douglas Horne's testimony about how he interviewed the CIA image analyst who was the first to evaluate the original Zapruder film, and that he was able to trace that it was taken up to a facility and spent the day at the facility, then came back to the CIA's image lab, and the person who originally saw it and then saw the next version said they weren't the same." And did you see that? Did you see how his conclusion after being on that review board for 4 years and actually taking the time to go investigate the whole kind of paper trail with the Zapruder film, that his conclusion that he's urging Congress under oath is that the CIA doctored the Zapruder film, and that there still exists a original Zapruder film somewhere, and that Congress should go get it. I would be curious to see what he would say about that. And, to the extent this probably plays into things that happen, for example, in academia as well, where if you spend your whole life working on something and your conclusion seems to be, challenged or not going to be the one, a lot of people probably just stick to their guns, and you have that cognitive dissonance where you don't want to hear it. It takes a kind of a very humble person to just admit if they're wrong, or to be open to being like, "Oh, I spent 30 years on this, but it turns out I was actually wrong." I think some of that's going on here. If you read comments on this video, people think other things. Maybe he's being paid. Maybe he's compromised by whoever wants to keep people not looking into this, which I think is very simple. It's very clearly a cover-up. And once we can prove, boom, clearly a cover-up, let's get to that evidence. Let's see, where are those x-rays? Where are those photos? All you have to prove is that he was shot in other areas and not by Oswald, and boom, the story does not check out. Next part of the investigation is, okay, who did it? And I don't know if that can ever really happen. It's 60 years later, but at least we would know that the CIA and other agencies covered up the fact that there were other shooters. And as I said in my last video, that has to lead you immediately to say, why? Why would they do that? If it was just Oswald alone, like Rivera says, and there's nothing else to it, there's nothing to cover up. And if anything, showing that there was more people than Oswald would help them, as I've said before. So that's where I think this kind of lands. it's interesting how when she asks him, is it case closed or are there more questions? He has an interesting answer. And he goes on to say how he thinks maybe he's curious if there's any involvement from the mafia or from Cuba or from Russia, which I find as an interesting deflection to get the attention away from, oh no, this was inside the US government that took him out. Oh, sure, it was the mafia. It was, Cuba. Right. Why would, but again, all signs, all credible testimony pointing towards the CIA was covering up how he was killed. So why would the CIA care if it was the mafia, if it was Cuba, if it was Russia? And so you got to be careful of that. And that angle's always there. They want to kind of deflect away from that. You even see that a little bit with the 9/11 case. And I'm not saying that I'm convinced that it was the U.S. government who plotted 9/11 or something, but all I know for sure is that the official story is 100% not true about what happened and how it happened. And that's a topic for another video. But again, that's one of the topics that this federal task force having these hearings has said they're going to investigate. But if you see some of the stuff that's come out in the last year, it's distracting away from the possibility that some elements within our own government were responsible for some sort of corruption that led to this event. And the same thing here. It was some foreign agency or it was organized crime or something. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that as I saw it pop up. Sure enough, and it's just bad journalism in my view. Kind of made my case as to why. And we live in an information world where that is the norm, unfortunately. Just not good questions being asked by people that are in great positions to be asking those questions and exposing that. And so it makes me think it's either incompetence, laziness, lack of maybe time, or it's just the media being steered a certain way. Even a media company like NewsNation that presents themselves as investigative, unbiased, and all that, and is even covering UFO whistleblowers. So that's all I got here for today. We'll see how this continues, but again, this is part of the larger issue with how the media portrays things. I don't know how many people are going to watch that clip and then go, the same nonsense. I'm not going to pay attention to JFK and all that. Whereas if that clip was kind of a condensed version of what I've been saying in the last two videos, Douglas Horne, why not bring Douglas Horne on there and say, wait, so you're telling me that the bullets were removed and never shown to anyone, and that there was a different brain image that was replaced, and that was confirmed by multiple medical professionals who worked on the examination? Why would all that happen if it was just Harvey Oswald that shot him? So instead of people perking up and going, oh my God, wow, this type of media coverage gets people to say, nothing to see here. And that's what we're constantly up against with these topics that expose corruption. So have a great day, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.